Unmute. Good luck.
A title slide features a photograph of a senior couple sitting on a crag overlooking a body of water. They both wear coats, the woman with a hood over her head. Text: enhancing the development of new technologies for Alzheimer's and other aging-related diseases through small business support. Tuesday, March 31, 2020. NIH, National Institute on Aging.
Thank you everyone for joining the webinar today, Enhancing the Development of New Technologies for Alzheimer's and Other Age-Related Diseases Through Small Business Support. We'll be starting the webinar momentarily.
The webinar will begin shortly. Share questions and comments in the chat window on the right side of your screen. Questions will be reviewed during the Q&A period. Closed captioning, http://bit.ly/3980IHU. Zoom technical support 1-888-799-9666, extension 2, or support.zoom.us/hc/en-us. Feedback: please tell us what you thought of this webinar at https://bit.ly/3byydqb. Follow us on Twitter at NIA_SBIR.
Thank you again, everyone. We look forward to your participation on today's webinar. Before we begin, we have a few housekeeping items. For questions and comments, we would like this to be interactive. So there is a Q&A feature that you can include your questions. We will have a chat at the end of the presentation, but we will be recording all of your questions throughout. So please send them throughout the presentation. We have closed captioning available as well as technical support. We do value your feedback, and we hope that by the end of this webinar that you will participate in a brief feedback form. We will also chat out this link. Please also join the conversation and follow us on Twitter at NIA_SBIR.
Hosts: National Institute on Aging, NIA Office of Small Business Research, www.nia.nih.gov/SBIR. University Lab Partners, www.universitylabpartners.org.
I'd like to thank our host, the National Institute on Aging, Office of Small Business Research, as well as University Lab Partners. I also want to thank all of you. We appreciate you adjusting with us through the COVID-19 changes in schedule and joining us online. We hope that you find this presentation useful.
Agenda: Introduction and Objectives. NIA's Office of Small Business Research, Program Overview, Opportunities, and Resources. Moderated Q&A. Yellow arrows point to the third camera-shaped Q&A icon in the dashboard, to the right of chat and raise hand.
Today, we'll be going through an overview of the Office of Small Business Research and the Small Business Innovation Research Program, as well as the Tech Transfer Program. We'll review opportunities and resources, as well as do a moderated Q&A. Please look at your viewer dashboard to submit questions at any time during the presentation.
Featured speakers: Stephanie Davis, Ph.D., Monique Larock, MPH, Senior Vice President, Ogilvy, FKH.
My name is Monique Larock, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Stephanie Davis. She is the Program Manager of the Office of Small Business Research at the National Institute on Aging. Dr. Davis, please take it away.
Heading: About SBIR and STTR, Congressionally Mandated Programs.
Thank you so much, Monique, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar today. I know it's kind of a disappointment for you all and for myself to not be able to have this event in person at University Lab Partners, but I'm very glad that we were able to adapt this event to a webinar version. So I wanted to start the presentation today by talking about the SBIR and STTR programs. So what are these programs and what is their purpose? So the Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR program, is a program that is specifically designed to help small businesses who are engaged in federal research and development it's designed to provide them with funding so that they can use that funding to commercialize technologies that fulfill the missions of government agencies. So in fiscal year 2020, all federal agencies were required to set aside 3.2% of their budget towards the SBIR programs. The Small Business Technology Transfer Program is very similar in its scope to the SBIR program. The main difference between the SBIR and STTR programs is that the SBIR program does not require the small business to collaborate with a nonprofit research institution, while the STTR program does. And in fiscal year 2020, the STTR program, all federal agencies were required to set aside 0.45% of their budget for that program. Next slide, please.
Photographs of a man standing on a mega chessboard in a park and a clear model of a skull. Text, why seek SBIR or STTR funding?
So what are the advantages for seeking SBIR and STTR funding from government agencies, in this case from the National Institute on Aging? So the main advantages to SBIR and STTR grants is that they provide seed funding for your new technologies. They are not a loan, so you don't have to pay it back. It's basically money for you to do what you want with in order to develop your technology. And it's also non-dilutive funding, which means it's not going to have any sort of impact on your stocks or your shares. It also allows the small business to retain intellectual property rights for any patents that are generated during the research and development for a technology. It provides recognition and visibility for your small business. And it also can help in attracting venture capital or external funding, as well as building strategic partnerships in the future. And one of the other things at NIH that we emphasize is that we give out SBIR and STTR grants to businesses that are in the very early stages of developing a technology. So often when external funding sources such as venture capitalists or angel investors are not going to invest in something that early stage, we are willing to invest in the earliest stages of commercialized technologies. Next slide, please.
A photograph of an elderly woman leaning out of a window with a smile, and the overlaid text, awards always made to the small business. Heading, eligibility.
So what are the eligibility requirements to participating in the SBIR and STTR programs? So the applicant must be a small business concern, as defined by the Small Business Administration. It must be an organized for-profit U.S. business, which means if it is not located in the United States, then it's usually not eligible for participation in the small business programs. It has to have no more than 500 employees, including affiliates, although most of the small businesses that receive SBIR and STTR grants tend to be much smaller, usually less than 50 employees. It has to be greater than 50% U.S. owned by individuals and independently operated, or it must be 50% owned and controlled by another business that is over 50% owned and controlled by one or more individuals. And then this only applies to SBIR awarded companies, but it must be at least 50% owned by multiple venture capital operating companies, hedge funds, private equity firms, or any combination thereof. Next slide, please.
Text, award is still made to the small business. Heading, critical differences. A table breaks down the differences in SBIR and STTR columns.
So as I mentioned previously, the SBIR and STTR programs are very similar in scope, but the main difference is that while an SBIR grant does not require a collaboration between a small business and a nonprofit research institution, an STTR grant does. So the SBIR permits partnerships between businesses and universities while the STTR requires it. For a Phase 1 award, an SBIR award, the small business may outsource up to 33% of all of its activities. But that does mean that at least 67% of the activities must be performed by the small business. And this number actually decreases to 50% for a Phase 2 award. Another requirement for SBIR awards is that the primary employment of the principal investigator for the award must be with the small business. Now, with an STTR award, for a phase 1 study, at least 40% of the work must be conducted from the business, and at least 30% must be done at the nonprofit research institution, such as the university. The other 30% can be split up either way between those two organizations. An STTR award also requires that an IP agreement be made between the small business and the research institution to guarantee that the small business retains intellectual property rights. Furthermore, with an STTR award, the PI's primary employment is not stipulated, so they can be at the small business, they can be at the research institute, or they can be at another organization, but they have to have at least 10% of their effort on this project. But one thing that doesn't change between these two programs is that the award is still made to the small business, regardless of whether or not it's a small business or an SBIR or an STTR award. Next slide.
Heading SBIR and STTR program phases and funding levels. A table breaks down the following awards: Phase 1, Discovery and Feasibility; Phase 2, Development and full R&D; and 2B, Competing Renewal. Between Phase 2 and 2B are the options: Fast Track, Direct to Phase 2, SBIR only, and Commercialization Readiness Pilot.
So at the NIH, we provide funding for different phases of commercialization. So here are some of the stages of development that we provide awards for. A Phase 1 study, which generally goes up to 1 year, is mostly designed for feasibility studies. So you're trying to figure out whether your technology is feasible and whether there's potential to take it further. So we provide up to $300,000 per year for most waiver topics, which at the NIA, if it has anything to do with aging, it's most likely going to be a waiver topic. And if you have a project that has anything to do with Alzheimer's disease or Alzheimer's disease-related dementias, you can get up to $500,000 for that year. For a Phase 2 award, this is more for further development and full R&D. So this is a 2-year award, and it can be up to $2 million for most waiver topics, or in the case of AD and ADRD topics, it can be up to $2.5 million. And this is mostly a continuation of what was developed in the Phase 1 award, but it also requires that the applicant submit a commercialization plan to detail how they're going to bring their technology to the market. There are some other options, one of which is called a Fast Track Award. So what this does is it's basically where the applicant submits a Phase 1 and a Phase 2 award application at the same time. And the advantage of this is that if the company fulfills all of their milestones for the Phase 1 portion of the award, they can basically move directly to the Phase 2. And so instead of having to reapply for a Phase 2 award, they can just proceed with the remainder of their study. So it eliminates that time lag that is normally associated with applying for a Phase 2 award. For SBIR awards, there is also an option to go direct to Phase 2, which if you have already performed the feasibility studies through other funding sources, you can, there is the option to go directly to the Phase 2 award instead of having to basically replicate your previous work. I would mention that a lot of companies think they're ready for a Phase 2 award, but they're not. So before you pursue this option, please be sure to reach out to your program officer to see whether or not you have fulfilled those Phase 1 milestones. There's another program called the Commercialization Readiness Pilot Program. So this is available for Phase 2 and later awardees, and it's basically extra money that can be used for late-stage R&D activities as well as technical assistance. And I'm going to be kind of giving a little bit more detail about that later, but the big advantage is that this pilot program does not have the subcontracting restrictions that you have with a normal SBIR award. And then finally, there's another option called the Phase 2B award, and it's a competing renewal, which means that after a Phase 2 award, is completed, the business has the option to reapply for this other grant and have it reviewed by a study section. And then this is additional money that is up to $3 million over 3 years. And it's designed to provide businesses with that kind of gap funding before they fully jump into the large-scale commercialization phase. Next slide, please.
Heading, Budget Specifics, Total Budget Costs.
So for the budget specifics, for the SBIR awards, they are all defined by the total cost, and there are subcontracting limitations, as I mentioned previously. So for instance, for the Phase 1 award, it's the maximum of 33% that could be subcontracted out. For the STTR award, it has to be 40% with the small business, 30% with the research institution. And it's very important to know these rules and the criteria depending upon what awards you're applying to. And it's also important to check the budget allowance in each funding opportunity. So for most Phase 1 awards, as I mentioned previously, it's $300,000 for a Phase 1, but now for AD and ADRD topics, it's up to $500,000. But be sure to check the funding opportunity announcement just to be absolutely sure of what your budget allowances are. Businesses do have the option to request a 7% fee. So a fee is basically your company's profit. It's a portion of the total budget, and we're not going to ask where that money is going. So that 7% is yours to do with what you will. There's also an option to count CRO type activities as small business costs, but there are several requirements for this. And these requirements are that these activities are commercially available, that all analyses are performed by the small business, and it is a fee per basis. So no indirect cost by fee for the service providers. Next slide, please.
Heading, NIA Office of Small Business Research, Core Activities. Central coordination, guidance, outreach, funding, networking, entrepreneurship.
So the Office of Small Business Research, which is my office, we have several different activities that we are responsible for doing within the NIA. So just a bit of background, we are a very young office. We were only formed about 1.5 years ago. The reason for that was because our budget for the NIA small business programs has increased dramatically over the past 6 years. So back in fiscal year 2013, we had a little bit less than $30 million for our small business programs. For fiscal year 2020, we're sitting at about $118 million because of the renewed focus on promoting new treatments and technologies for Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's disease-related dementia patients. So the main role of our office is that, first of all, we are the central coordinating office for the small business program at the National Institute on Aging. So while we do not have our program staff in-house per se, we work with the different scientific divisions in the NIA to administer and help fund small business awards in the portfolios of our program staff. We also provide guidance for our applicants. So when an applicant reaches out to us, we can help prepare them for their application or a resubmission of a grant, as well as discuss the funding opportunity announcements that they might be eligible for. We're responsible for performing outreach activities, so attending conferences, putting on educational events, and also hosting webinars, such as the one you're on today, are some of our various outreach activities. We're obviously responsible for funding, so we are, one of our goals is to look at the NIA portfolio and look at whether we are funding areas of technologies more in a certain area, and it's our goal to look at our portfolio and see what kind of technologies we need to be targeting within the next few years in order to fulfill the mission of the NIA. Networking, so it's our job to facilitate connections between awardees and potential strategic partners. And finally, we, within our office and in conjunction with the NIH Seed Office, it is our responsibility to provide entrepreneurial training and programs and educational webinars on key commercialization related topics. Next slide.
Heading, Resources to help research entrepreneurs. First-time and never-funded applicants, all awardees, Phase 1 awardees.
So we have several different programs and resources that are available to applicants and awardees at every stage of their grant. So for example, some of you might have heard of the Applicant Assistance Program, which we just started participating in last year. This is a program that is available to applicants who have never been funded or haven't received an SBIR or STTR grant since 2010. So this is a 10-week personalized coaching program that helps inexperienced applicants develop a strong Phase 1 application. All awardees are eligible for what's known as Technical Assistance Budget Allowance Funds, or TABA funds. So TABA funds support services such as access to technologies, intellectual property protections, market research. Any sort of technical assistance falls under the TABA allowance. And all Phase 1 awardees are eligible for up to $6,500 in TABA funds, and then this number increases to $50,000 for Phase 2 awardees. And businesses do have the option to request these funds when they are submitting their grant application. We also offer diversity supplements. So these are administrative supplements that can be added on to a parent award, and it's designed to facilitate the hiring of individuals, specifically students, postdocs, and researchers who are from underrepresented groups in the life sciences. The C3I program is a program that is designed for medical device innovators. So it's basically a 24-week entrepreneurial training program for people who are developing novel medical devices. And I mentioned that the SEED office, which is the Small Business Entrepreneurial Education and Development Office within NIH, they are the kind of the main SBIR, STTR, and entrepreneurial resource within NIH. And they have several programs and experts that are available to all awardees, including regulatory experts and their entrepreneurs in residence. And then finally, Phase 1 awardees are eligible for the I-Corps program at NIH. This is an 8-week intensive course that allows small businesses to basically have one-on-one meetings with various stakeholders and get real-world entrepreneurship training. The whole purpose of this program is that entrepreneurs and companies don't really get the feedback they need just by sitting in their office or in their lab. They need to meet one-on-one with their stakeholders and get that targeted feedback to improve their product. Next slide, please.
Heading: the SBIR and STTR programs at NIA. What SBIR and STTR seeks, and special research interests in AD and ADRD. A conversation bubble reads: available opportunities, Omnibus funding, NIA-focused funding.
So our programs, what we're mainly looking for are, we want technologies that will satisfy some sort of unmet clinical need, and we want products that have a commercial potential. So projects that take advantage of the company's expertise. We're looking in Phase 1 awards for the studies to produce feasibility data. So making sure that this proposed technology is, able to be commercialized. And then for a Phase 2 award, we're looking for proposed product-focused development activities. So pretty much anything to do with aging, with a few exceptions, is our focus area. So we offer up to $300,000 in general, but right now for Alzheimer's disease and AD-related dementia, we offer $500,000 for Phase 1 awards and up to $2.5 million for Phase 2 awards. So there are two different types of opportunities that NIA participates in. There are the Omnibus funding opportunities, and these have 3 deadlines per year: in January, in April, and in September. And these are investigator-initiated proposals that can be anything to do with aging. We also have focused funding opportunity announcements, which right now, all of our focused FOAs have to do with Alzheimer's disease and AD-related dementias. And these application due dates may vary, so it's important to check that funding opportunity announcement to see when the due dates, because some of them will follow those standard due dates and some of them will not. But right now, we have a very large portion of our portfolio focusing on Alzheimer's disease and AD-related dementias, specifically on technologies for the prevention, diagnosis, treatment, care and caregiving, and all of those areas listed there.
Text, NIA seeks AD and ADRD research focusing on prevention, diagnosis, treatment, care and caregiving, research and clinical tools, analytical tools, digital health, novel devices.
We're looking for those technologies. Next slide, please.
Photographs of a woman making a presentation in a meeting room and a pair of hands typing on a laptop. Heading, COVID-19 impact on Omnibus funding deadline.
Okay, so I'm sure you all were wondering when the giant elephant in the room was going to come up, but yes, we do acknowledge that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to affect your ability to submit an application in a timely manner. So because of that, the NIH just listed a new notice, which basically says that we will be highly accommodating of any late application submitted through May 1st. So while the deadline is still April 6th, that is still the receipt date. We are going to try to our best ability to accommodate any application submitted before May 1st, and we're going to try to have those reviewed in either the August or October 2020 council review. That's not a guarantee, but we are trying to be flexible. So if your application is submitted after May 1st, it might not be reviewed until the January 2021 council round, so just keep that in mind. And if you have any other questions related to how COVID-19 is affecting our grant deadlines and other policies, the NIH guidance, just click on that, or you can contact our small business email, which is niasmallbusiness@mail.nih.gov. And we will be sharing a PDF version of this slide deck. So if you're wanting to have access to the hyperlinks, you will be able to do so. Next slide, please.
Heading, Application to Award. A flow chart with icons details the funding process, from the time an applicant initiates the research idea to the just-in-time GMB review and notice of award. Waiting times after submission include 1 to 2 months for the scientific review group to evaluate scientific merit, 2 months for advisory council to recommend approval, 1 to 2 months for IC to allocate funds, and 1 to 2 months for notice of award.
So this diagram just shows the general process that is required from the time that an application is submitted until the time that it is until you actually see the money. So when an applicant submits an award to NIH electronically, it is assigned to the Center for Scientific Review, which it will be then put into an institute or center or an IC based on what the focus area of that grant is, and also a scientific review group, which is also known as a study section. So it's assigned, if the proposal is aging focused, generally it will come to us. And then the scientific review group that the application is assigned to will depend upon what kind of technology it is. So study sections don't belong to NIH institutes or centers, but they are grouped based on the type of technology that you're developing. So drugs, diagnostics, digital health applications, they all have their own study sections. So once the study sections review the applications based on technical merit and commercialization potential, all of these scores will go to the advisory councils in the different institutes and centers, and the advisory councils will recommend which applications that they think should be funded. So once advisory council has their say, the funding list will be prepared by program staff in each institute and center. The institute and center will allocate funds, and then the companies that receive a high score and are anticipated to be funded are required to submit their just-in-time package to the grants management branch, and afterwards they are usually notified of whether or not they received the award. And this is a process that can take anywhere from 5 to 12 months. So, you know, and this also, because there is this long process, it is important to plan ahead. And we recommend usually when a company receives a phase 1 award to start working on that phase 2 award right away, just because a phase 1 award only covers a company up to a year. And in addition, because there is that potential funding gap between the phase 1 and the phase 2 awards, we recommend pursuing multiple funding sources. Next slide.
Heading, Application Cycles. A table lists standard due dates, September 5, April 5, January 5, review meetings, November, June, March, Advisory Council review, January, August, May, and earliest project start date, April, September, July.
So, as I mentioned previously, there are 3 standard due dates for the Omnibus solicitation: September, April, and January. So this table will show you when a grant application is received, when it's anticipated that it's going to get reviewed, when Advisory Council is going to review it, and then when you'll actually see the money. So generally speaking, the April funding deadline usually has the smallest wait time from when the grant is submitted until you actually receive the money. So April to September is a 5-month delay. The September due date, usually there's the longest delay. So from September to April is a 7-month delay. That's usually because when we're waiting for the new fiscal year budget, there is that to consider. So just when you submit your application, it's going to vary how long it'll take for you to actually be notified that it's funded and receive the funds. Next slide, please.
A pie chart labeled Portfolio Classifications, AD and Non-AD. Slide heading, NIA Priority Areas and Portfolio. Priority areas are covered by NIA's 4 main divisions: aging biology, behavioral and social research, geriatrics, and clinical gerontology, and neuroscience.
So the NIA is pretty unique among the NIH institutes because we're basically disease agnostic. Since so many other conditions affect older adults, there are a lot of scientific research areas that we focus on that will overlap with other institutes and centers. So it is important to contact your program staff before you submit an application, because oftentimes a proposal that's appropriate for us will be appropriate for another institute. The classic example of this is anything to do with Alzheimer's disease is appropriate for us, but it can also apply to the National Institute for Neurological Disorders and Stroke. And there are other examples of disease overlap between us and other institutes and centers. But generally speaking, the priority areas for our division are, they fall under 4 different categories. So the Division for Aging Biology tends to be more basic research focused, and it looks mostly on studies and technologies that are focused on, you know, increasing healthy aging and identifying molecular pathways involved with the aging process. So this one tends to be more basic research focused and tends to have less small business applications, but we still do have a fair number in this division. The next one is behavioral and social research. So this specifically looks at aging from more of a social science standpoint. A lot of the focus areas in behavioral and social research involve helping older adults age in place, making sure that the healthcare system is prepared to handle an influx of older adults needing treatment, making sure that caregivers for Alzheimer's disease and ADRD patients are supported. These are some of the main focus areas for behavioral and social research. Geriatrics and clinical gerontology is our newest division. There is a significant overlap between GCG and the Division of Aging Biology, but the main difference between these two is that geriatrics and clinical gerontology is more clinically focused, while the Division of Aging Biology is more basic and preclinical focused. So geriatrics and clinical gerontology looks mainly at improving the health of older adults in a clinical setting. And then finally, there's the Division of Neuroscience, which, as the name suggests, it looks at examining the aging brain and how cognitive function changes with age. So naturally, most of our Alzheimer's disease and AD-related dementia projects fall within the division of neuroscience. And if you look at the pie chart over to the right of your slide, this shows kind of the breakdown in terms of what types of technologies we fund in our portfolio. This is not a static breakdown. It does change from year to year depending upon what kind of applications we get. But generally speaking, about 1/3 of our portfolio is treatments, which includes small molecules, peptide-related therapeutics. The next biggest categories are medical devices, so these include sensors and monitoring technologies, as well as software as medical devices and digital and mobile health technologies. And then the remainder of our portfolio includes supportive devices, research tools, in vitro diagnostics, and imaging devices. But once again, I need to emphasize that this is not a set breakdown. This just depends upon what kind of applications we get for a particular technology from year to year. Next slide.
Heading, NIA Funding Opportunities. A table with opportunities for SBIR and STTR listed under columns for Omnibus FOAs and AD and ADRD focused FOAs.
So here's a table that has our current funding opportunities listed. So on the left of the table, you have the Omnibus funding opportunity announcements. So the SBIR and STTR, they both have two different types of FOAs, one of which does not allow clinical trials and one of which requires a clinical trial. So if you have something that's more general aging focused, you want to be sure to select the one that best applies to your study in whether or not it's a clinical study. For anybody who is looking at something related to Alzheimer's disease or AD-related dementias, I highly recommend that you apply for PAS 19316 or 317, because this is the funding opportunity announcement that will give you that increased budget. So $500,000 for a phase 1, $2.5 million for a phase 2. And then we have two other targeted FOAs that have to do with AD and ADRD. So PAR-18512 and 514 look at health span or lifespan extending interventions for Alzheimer's disease and ADRD patients. And then PAR-18-186 or 185 are for the development of socially assistive robots that will help dementia patients and their caregivers. Next slide, please.
A photograph of a researcher looking into a microscope. Heading, already have a phase 2? Consider the Commercialization Readiness, CRP, program.
So I previously mentioned the Commercialization Readiness Pilot, or the CRP program, and this is an option available to individuals who are currently have a phase 1, phase 2, or a phase 2B award. And this includes both SBIR and STTR awardees. So what's the advantage to this program? This is a special mechanism called an SB1, and the advantage to this is that there are no subcontracting restrictions. You still have to explain and justify your subcontracting plan, but as I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, for a phase 2 award for like an SBIR, for example, you still have to have the small business do 50% of the work. For a CRP award, you don't have to have that. You can outsource most of it because a lot of these are larger scale R&D type activities that are, often best done by, subcontracted out by another organization. So this is a separate application under the parent award that does require peer review, but there are review criteria that includes a focus on the innovation of the product. So these are usually activities that are done for later stage R&D. And because of the lack of subcontracting restrictions, CRP funds can be used for activities that are not typically supported by the parent award. Next slide, please.
Heading, remember, focus on product. 2 hexagons, one labeled science under academic grant, and the other labeled product under SBIR and STTR grant. Arrows pointing to each side clockwise from the top of the science hexagon read: expertise and team, discovery, research, environment, significance, knowledge increase, innovation, what could be, theoretically possible, product, optional, and approach, appropriate for discovery. Arrows pointing to each side clockwise from the top of the product hexagon read: expertise and team, phase 1 and phase 2, environment, significance, changing a paradigm, innovation, competitive advantage, science, mandatory, and approach, product development. An extra two-way arrow labeled "commercialization" is between significance and innovation.
So if any of you who are attending this webinar have ever submitted an academic research grant, such as an R01 award, there are different review criteria that study sections will use to judge the merit of your application. And these different criteria are listed on the left-hand side of the slide. Now, some of these criteria are the same ones used to judge an SBIR or an STTR grant. However, there are some different criteria that small business grants require compared to a purely academic grant. For an academic grant, the main deliverable for this project that is proposed is that you're going to be increasing the base of scientific knowledge. For an SBIR or an STTR grant, that is not the main goal. The main goal is to have a science-based study that you're proposing, but the main goal is to develop a product that can be commercialized. So it is very important when you are writing up your small business grants that when you're proposing your study that you emphasize that it is something that can be commercialized and can ultimately benefit humans, you know, in a very real world manner. And it's something that can be brought to the market. Next slide, please.
Heading: compose of specific aims page. The executive summary and first impressions. First 1/3 to 2/3 of page, the elevator pitch. Why is it meritorious? Last 1/3 to a half of page, the specific aims for the proposed project.
So the main document that we like to use in terms of summarizing the goals of your project and what type of technology you're going to be developing is called the specific aims page. So if any of you have not written a specific aims page, it's basically our version of the executive summary. And it's going to be the first impression that NIH staff members get with what you're proposing. So we like to emphasize that there is a method to the madness when composing a specific aims page. So it is a one-page document, and this is very strict in terms of when you submit your grant, it has to be 1 page maximum. For the first either 2/3 to 1/2 of the document, you want to be using that to develop your elevator pitch. So you want to explain to the reviewers and to the program staff, why is your application meritorious? You want to be focusing on the prototype that you're trying to develop, how this prototype is innovative compared to other technologies on the market. You want to emphasize what the unmet need being addressed is, as well as your technical challenges that you're going to be overcoming. You want to also give your value proposition and your competition. You want to emphasize any preliminary data that you've already developed. And then finally, last but not least, you want to emphasize why it is relevant to the NIA's mission. And the last 1/3 to 1/2 of the page, you're going to be actually listing your specific aims for the proposed project. Your aims are your key goals and milestones that you want to develop and that you want to do in order to either test the feasibility or further develop your technology. So for your specific aims, you want to be very specific on what you're proposing, and you want to list the key models, assays, and metrics you're going to be using to ensure that you have met those goals. And having these quantitative performance milestones is very important, especially when your grant is being reviewed by the study section. You want to provide very concrete methods of demonstrating that your technology is feasible and that it can meet some sort of unmet clinical need. So before you submit a grant application, we highly recommend that you draft up a specific aims page and that you send it to us so that we can provide feedback, usually with the NIA Office of Small Business Research. when a specific aims page comes to us, we will match you up with the correct program staff member who is an expert in your area, and they would be able to provide you with targeted feedback before you submit. Next slide, please.
Heading SF424 Application Guide. A copy of the digital version of SBIR and STTR instructions for NIH and other PHS agencies. Text, use Ctrl+F keyword search on this document. Use NIH Assist for application submission and review the annotated application forms. grants.nih.gov/grants/electronic receipts/files/annotated_smallbus_forms-e.pdf.
So the big document that will pretty much answer any questions that you want to know about when submitting a small business grant is called the SF424 Application Guide. So this document is available for your use and for you to download on the NIH website. And it's a pretty large document. It's about 177 pages. So what we recommend are using the search function to find the answer to your questions. But it has all of the different policies and all of the different requirements for a small business grant. So what type of components do you need? What are the page limits for your grant? It's all in here. And if you have any questions of what you're reading in there, you can of course direct them to us. But this should be kind of your first line of answering your basic questions. So right now, I should specify we are using the Forms version E series, which is the one that's linked in this presentation. After this next grant deadline, so after the April-May deadline, we are going to be switching to the new Form version F series, which is also on the website. So just keep that in mind that it's going to be a little bit different after this next deadline. Next slide.
Heading, NIAID Sample Applications, a great resource. www.niaid.gov/grants-contracts/sample-application #R43R44. A table lists PI and grantee institutions and links to full sample applications.
If you want to see what a very strong and well-written small business application looks like, our sister institute, the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease, which I'm sure you've been hearing all about lately with Dr. Fauci and the COVID situation, they have generously provided some applications that have been submitted in the past that have been funded. These are available for you to download and use as examples of well-written small business applications. So for example, if you want to see what a well-written specific aims page looks like, all of these applications have specific aims pages that you can read over and basically see what they did well and adapt that to your application. But I should note, and you can kind of see here listed in the table, a lot of these use an older version of the SBIR and STTR forms. So while we are currently on Forms E and about ready to transition to the Forms F set, these use Forms B1 and B2, which means the application has the same components, but it might look a little bit different and the components might be in a different order. So just keep that in mind. But, you know, a well-written application is still a well-written application. Next slide, please.
A blank sample application. Heading, Specify Institute and Study Section. Who is going to review your application? Identify the most appropriate study section before you submit your application.
So when you submit a small business application, there is the option to specify which study section and which institute you want to review and or fund your grant. So basically, as I mentioned previously, anything that has to do with aging, with a few exceptions, will usually go to us. There are a few topics like of aging-focused diseases that are picked up by other institutes. For example, even though a lot of cancers are more prevalent among older adults, the National Cancer Institute tends to take most cancer-focused applications. So that's why we recommend reaching out to the program staff just to make sure that your application is a good fit for the NIA. However, if there is an area of overlap, we recommend listing a second institute and center. So the classic example, Alzheimer's disease. We tend to fund most Alzheimer's related applications, but we recommend listing NINDS, National Institute for Neurological Disorders and Stroke, as the secondary IC. And who's going to be on your scientific review groups? For small business focused study sections, they tend to be a combination of academic and industry reviewers. So there will be about 3 primary reviewers who are going to read over your application carefully and then lead the discussion with the entire study section. And then all members of the scientific review panel will then score your application based on the previously mentioned criteria after that discussion section. So if you want to look through the Center for Scientific Review study sections, which the link that is in this slide will lead you to the list of small business study sections, you are able to look through their rosters and see if a study section has members that would have the expertise necessary to review your application.
CCSR website for study section descriptions, www.csr.nih.gov/roster_proto/SBIR_section.asp.
And you do have the option to request those study sections if you think one might be a good fit for your application. But if you're not sure, there's always the option to ask the program staff whether or not they think that the scientific review group would be a good fit for your app. Next slide, please.
Heading, Specify Institute and Study section. A blank PHS assignment request form.
So on the PHS assignment request form, which is one of the components of your grant application, here is where you can suggest the IC assignments that we recommend to, if you want to submit an application to us, try to put a secondary IC as well. And then down further on the page, you can also list study sections that you would like your grant to be assigned to. And then finally, there's also an option to list specific scientific areas of expertise that are needed to review your application so that we can best identify, or the Center for Scientific Review can best identify reviewers who have that necessary expertise. Next slide.
Heading, Draft a clear application, research strategy.
So we mentioned previously how to draft up a strong specific aims page. Now your research strategy is more of the in-depth version of what you propose in your scientific aims. For a phase 1 grant application, this is a 6-page document, so no more than 6 pages, while the phase 2 application has a 12-page limit. So in your research strategy, you want to make sure that you're addressing all of your review criteria. You want to provide all of the background information on your particular topic. You want to address the significance of the problem. You want to explain how your technology is innovative compared to the technologies that are currently available. And you want to provide a really detailed plan that shows exactly how you're going to achieve your milestones and fulfill your specific aims. When you're proposing your approach, so how you're going to fulfill those aims, you want to make sure that your plan is feasible in terms of the budget constraints as well as the time constraints. So for a phase 1 application, you don't need preliminary data, but if you have it, please include it because reviewers tend to fund applications that have more preliminary data because it shows that your application is more feasible. We recommend that if there are any potential pitfalls to your approach, that you address them, and you want to provide alternative strategies to help overcome these pitfalls. Don't ignore them, because if you do, the reviewers will still find them and they will ding you on that. So make sure that you address them and provide alternative strategies. So the approach section is very important. I would arguably say it's as important, almost as important as the specific aims page. Normally when an applicant does not get funded, it's because they get scored poorly on the approach. So this is one of those sections of your grant that if you have any trusted colleagues, have them look over it. If those colleagues have previous SBIR grant experience, definitely have them look over it because the reviewers tend to look very carefully at your approach. Next slide, please.
Heading, draft a clear application. Other components.
Other components that are very helpful and in terms of getting your grant funded, letters of support. So if you have any consultants and collaborators who can vouch for your technology and your company, obtain as many of them as possible within reason. So if you have any field leaders, clinicians, potential stakeholders, even if these individuals are not listed on your application, having letters of support from them is very important. So you want to include those if you think it's going to add credence to your application. For a phase 2 award, you want to have a strong commercialization plan.
12 pages.
Do not include a commercialization plan with a phase 1 award though, because it's not allowed. However, make sure that this is a strong plan because this is another area of focus for phase 2 awards that are being reviewed. You also want to provide biosketches for all senior and key personnel. So a biosketch is basically a modified CV.
Under 5 pages.
You want to provide the budgets for each project period and for each subcontract. So you also need to justify your subcontracting strategy in those budget documents. You provide descriptions of the facilities they're going to be used, as well as equipment that are required to carry out the study. And if your studies require human subjects or vertebrate animals, you have to include these sections. Next slide, please.
Connect with NIA.
So if you'd like to connect with us, you can visit our website, which is hyperlinked to this slide. And on our website, we have an overview of upcoming events, as well as new funding opportunities that are coming out. The NIH Grants Guide can be used to search for any funding opportunities across NIH, but they have all of our current funding opportunities listed. So also, if you want to stay up to date with things that are going on in our office, we recommend subscribing to the National Institute on Aging blog because we often have blog posts on new programs and initiatives from our office. If you have a general question, you can email the NIA Small Business at mail.nih.gov email. Normally, if you receive a reply, it's going to be from me, but occasionally one of our program staff will answer your questions as well. And you can also follow us on Twitter at NIA_SBIR. Next slide, please.
Questions? To submit a question, select the Q&A icon from your menu bar and type your question in the box. The moderator will read your question and direct it to the correct speaker. In the menu bar, the Q&A button is a camera-shaped icon, the third after the chat and raise hand icons.
Okay, so if you haven't yet submitted any questions, be sure to select the Q&A icon on your menu bar and type your question into the box. And just a quick note, if you have a similar question with another participant, your questions might be combined just for the sake of time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Davis. So we will now be responding to several of the questions that we received during the webinar. There is still time to submit questions. We will try to get through as many as we can. I know that some of you have asked about access to this presentation, and we wanted to share that we will be sending this out with a thank you note so that you can link to this presentation and have a view at your own leisure. With that said, I have a couple questions from folks on the program overview section. So Steve Francis notes that his understanding is the primary research activities for a phase 1 grant must take place within a 12-month time frame, but there may be some allowance for ancillary activities to take place outside the 12-month time frame. Can you provide some guidance on that?
Yes, so I will answer that question. Thank you, Monique. So when you are proposing your activities for your phase 1 grant, we generally recommend that what you propose can fit within that time frame. If there's additional activities that need to be performed later that take longer than 12 months, we recommend saving those for your phase 2 study. However, there is an option for what's called a no-cost extension. And what this does is if there is some sort of activity that is taking longer than anticipated and you don't think you'll be able to finish in that 12-month time frame, you can request an extension so that even if you don't get more money after that 12-month period is over, you still have more time to finish your project. So that is an option if, you know, right now with the COVID situation, we imagine there's going to be a lot of no-cost extensions being requested because so many research facilities are shut down. So when things happen that are out of your control and something takes longer than anticipated, there is that option to request an extension.
Thank you. Next question, does the STTR program have phase 2 grants?
Yes, they do. However, the STTR program does not have direct phase 2, but they still have, but pretty much besides the direct to phase 2, the STTR programs participate in all of the other types of grants that the SBIR programs do. So there are fast track STTR grants, just not direct to phase 2.
Thank you. What constitutes allowed work under phase 2 or direct to phase 2? For example, a small business may have established technical feasibility of an idea with an MVP. It still requires time and effort for system hardening and scale trials with people to measure the impact in the field. Would that be a phase 2 or direct to phase 2?
Let's see.
I think it's also just helping people to understand when they should apply to a phase 2 versus a direct to phase 2. That might be
okay, that makes sense. Okay,
apply to more people.
Yes, so to answer that question, we usually recommend asking the program staff that question because they usually have a good idea of what is going to be successful in a study section in a direct to phase 2 versus a regular just phase 2. For most applicants, we recommend that they come in with a phase 1. However, in some cases, it is more appropriate for direct to phase 2, but we recommend running it by them first. Usually they'll be able to give you a good idea of whether or not you'll be successful with a direct to phase 2 versus just coming in at a phase 1. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and thank you, Dr. Davis. I also just wanted to reshare that it is very helpful to talk to a program officer and to reach out to NIA Office of Small Business Research team. They will take your questions. They may help you think through your application, what's the right fit, making sure it works for NIA, and really give you some tips to be successful. So please don't be shy about reaching out to us if you have an idea or anticipating an application. Our job is to help you.
Yes, and to kind of continue what Monique said, your program officer is basically going to be your point person at the NIH. So even though, for example, managing your grant is going to be done by a grants officer and the review process is managed by scientific review officers, your program officer is going to be that person who can connect you with those individuals. So if you have a question and you're not really sure which staff member can answer that, just contact them and they can usually refer you to the correct person.
Thank you. The next question related to STTR, is it required that the signing officer is employed more than 50% by the for-profit company, or can it be less than 50%?
I will be honest, I'm not really sure about that one. I don't think it's required, but I'll have to double check on that one.
Okay. Are there animal models that are that can be used for an application?
So, for example, I just want to double check to make sure I have this correctly. So, for example, are you asking if it's possible that your proposal involves the development of a new animal model? If that's the case, then we do have, generally speaking, the development of new animal models tend to be more academic research grants. However, we do have some businesses that are contract research organizations who are looking to develop a new animal model for testing new therapies. It is possible, and we do have some companies that do that.
Thank you. The next question relates to the research interest. Do you include idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis in what you would consider aging-related disease?
So idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, for the most part, even though that is kind of an aging-related disease, for the most part, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute tends to take most of those applications. However, I would recommend, if you are applying for that particular disease focus, to put NHLBI as your number one, but maybe put us as the secondary IC. Oftentimes, because, as I mentioned, we are a disease agnostic institute, we are often the secondary institute for a lot of other applications, just because a lot of those diseases are more common amongst older adults.
Thank you. Does NIA have a tissue, serum, or CSF repository that we can access for samples for use as part of the grant application?
So there are some, and this is not particularly under the focus of our office, but there are some biobanks that are being developed in conjunction with the Division of Aging Biology, as well, I believe as well, with geriatrics and clinical gerontology. I will have to get back to you on that, but I know that biobanks are one of the areas of focus that some of the scientific divisions are working on.
Thank you. And there, we have used some acronyms. I just want to clarify for folks. IC means institute or center. So as you know, there are various institutes and some centers at NIH. Okay, so some folks are actually trying to get started on their applications and would like to know, is it possible to get support on their specific aims page?
So when you contact your program officer, they will give you support and feedback on your specific aims page. The reason why we have the AAP in place is because in addition to connecting you with your program staff to provide that support, the AAP also provides coaching on other areas, such as, getting all of the necessary registrations out of the way for your company. But if you want just support and feedback on your aims page, your program officers are available to basically do that at any time. We do recommend to reach out to them at least 1 month before the due date, because when people wait to the last minute, they tend to get really overwhelmed, and often they're not going to be able to give your application the attention that it needs. So the earlier you get it to your program officer, the better, but they are there to help you.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Can you please share more information about the Application Assistance Program and what that application process is like?
Yes, so I'm actually the coordinator for the NIA version of the AAP, and to apply for that program, the next round for the AAP, the portal's opening on April 14th and it's closing on May 14th. But the goal of that program is to take applicants who haven't been successful or are generally not as familiar with the SBIR, STTR grant process and give them a coach who is an expert on getting applicants funded. So what they'll do is they will walk you through all the necessary registrations that are required before you submit a grant. They will give you feedback on your application. They will connect you with your program officer, so your program officer can go over your specific aims page. And it's generally just designed to help you become more familiar with the process and make applying for an NIH grant less daunting. Because we understand that for companies and for individuals running companies who are not affiliated with academic institutions, a lot of them aren't as experienced with NIH grants, and the process can be daunting. So we're trying to make that process less scary and less confusing by having the AAP in place. But to apply for it, generally the application process for the AAP takes no more than 10 to 15 minutes, and we do require 2 documents. So we require basically a specific aims page or an executive summary that goes over what you are proposing for your phase 1 application, and then another document that kind of gives an overview of what your technology is. So hopefully you should have some sort of version of these documents already that can be modified for the application. But the AAP application process is generally very short. For the actual phase 1 grants, we recommend at least 2 months for that.
Thank you. 2 quick notes and then I'll proceed on questions. We are getting a lot of questions, so we will extend this webinar to 2:15 just because we want to be as helpful as we can. If there are questions we don't get to, we have them marked, and we'll also be sharing our contact information in our thank you note. I also just wanted to share that we really appreciate all of the questions we're getting. We will be sending out links. There was a request for some of the specific research interest and FOAs. We will be sending those out as well. Okay, so to continue, this is a 2-part question. I think one we can use for more general support for everyone to understand, and then I have some specific follow-up. The first part is understanding the resubmission process. Not everyone gets awarded their first time to apply. So would like you to speak to that broadly. And then Dr. Davis, if you could also help one of our participants whose proposal was rejected based on their research plan. And this person has teamed up with a research organization and has a new research plan. Can they submit their proposal again?
Yes. So one thing that I did not mention, but I really want to emphasize now, is that most of our applicants don't get funded the first time around. And that's okay, because the success rates for people who apply the first time, companies that apply the first time get funded about 11% of the time when they resubmit their grant. Especially if they're able to meet with their program officer, go over the reviewer's critiques and address them appropriately, that success rate jumps up to about 30%. So you're 3 times more likely to get funded, if you resubmit a grant than if you just submit it once and then let it be. But the key to making sure that your resubmitted grant has the best chance of success is that you want to make sure you make time to have a call with your program officer and then go through each of those individual critiques. I might have mentioned this in our presentation, but the approach is usually the area where applications get sunk. And so what I would recommend specifically is go through your critiques and see what portions of your application got the lowest scores. Those are going to be the ones you want to focus on. And your program officer will give you their advice and their strategies on how to appropriately address these critiques. When you address them, it's important that you are constructive and not defensive, even if the temptation is there to be defensive. But the biggest thing that we want to emphasize is don't give up. A lot of people are tempted to give up after they get rejected, but currently I'm working on another project involving sample applications, which will be publicized at a later date. But there are so many applications that I've seen of where the company resubmitted and got a really great score. But the first time they submitted, they either didn't get scored or their score wasn't very great. So don't give up. A lot of times it just takes a resubmission.
Thank you. I also just wanted to share that in addition to getting non-dilutive funding, awardees are able to access a variety of other programs that can help with the commercialization assistance and getting you to the next level. So I just wanted to share, we have some of those which we will chat out on our fact sheet, so you can take a look at some of those options that are available to you. In addition, NIA has a range of resource tools, so we can share those as well. I'm going to move over to a few more questions about the application process. So if I submitted my application under the category for Alzheimer's research, can I submit a similar or the same one under Omnibus applications?
Yes, so we have several companies who have submitted an award application through the Alzheimer's specific funding opportunity announcement. So let's say, for example, you're developing a drug that can be used for Alzheimer's disease, but it can also be used for some other aging-related condition. That is completely fine if you want to submit a different proposal for a separate indication under the Omnibus. What we don't recommend is if you do have two different applications, don't submit them at the same time, because it's generally frowned upon to submit two applications in the same funding cycle. So just stagger them. Submit the one that has more preliminary data first and then go with the other one. But yes, we have companies with multiple awards from us, and some of them are Alzheimer's disease focused and then some of them are not. It is possible to submit, you know, for example, a drug or a diagnostic or some sort of technology for two different indications, and they're on two different proposals.
Thank you. If a grant application is submitted with a human subject component, which requires standing up an IRB, does the applicant have to show certification of IRB approval before notice of successful grant application?
I don't actually know the answer to this one, but if you email me about it, I can get you an answer to that really quickly.
Thank you. And we have tracked who sent this and can flag and follow up. The COVID-19 pandemic has upended many of the small businesses. Are there any NIA-focused FOAs between April 5th and September 5th?
So as of right now, some institutes have put out notices of special interests that are that allow for supplements to people who are affected by COVID-19, or for example, if they want to add a COVID-19 focused component to their grant. Right now, we don't have any specific funding opportunity announcements, but if you, after this webinar, you'll be added to our email list. So if any of that changes and we do have anything specific that comes out, you will be notified.
Thank you. If one has submitted an SBIR application and has become an awardee at another institute, can they apply for phase 2 through NIA?
So that is, let's see, just wanted to make sure that I'm getting this clearly. So if you have a phase 1 award from another IC, can you basically switch your phase 2 award to NIA? Yes. Yes. So we have had companies, for example, that have, especially if the sometimes the other institute, center, or office doesn't provide phase 2 awards, or for example, maybe it's a better fit for NIA with the phase 2, it is possible to switch. Most people who get phase 2 awards through us did have the phase 1 award through us as well, but it is possible to switch.
Thank you. Perhaps we can go a little bit more in depth on fast track. We're getting a couple of requests on understanding what the process is and whether they can transition from phase 1 to phase 2. If they've done a fast track, when they can apply for CRP or phase 2B.
So if you're, so for a fast track, as I mentioned previously, you basically submit the phase 1 and phase 2 applications at the same time, and you officially transition into the phase 2 portion once you've met your phase 1 milestone. So if you want to apply for a CRP, you can do that, but you have to be in the phase 2 portion of your grant. So in order to be eligible for that, you have to have already fulfilled the phase 1 milestones. The difference between someone in the phase 2 portion of a fast track versus somebody who's applying for a phase 2 award is that with the fast track, they only had to go through the peer review process one time, as opposed to a separate award, which requires 2 different peer review processes in order to get the phase 1 and the phase 2 awards.
Thank you. Does NIA require any IP royalty agreement with funded research?
So for your application, when you're submitting your application, I don't believe so. However, if you do get an award, specifically if you get an STTR award, it is required that you have an IP agreement in place, just because you want to make sure that the small business is able to maintain the intellectual property rights. However, like including those agreements with your application, no.
Thank you. someone has a company who completed a phase 1 clinical trial, and they want to know if they can apply for a phase 2 directly without going through a phase 1.
So when I just want to get some clarification. So when we say a phase 1 award with a clinical trial, or like a phase 1 clinical trial? Because
they've done a phase 1. Yeah, they've done a phase 1 clinical trial.
Okay, but not a phase 1 SBIR grant.
Correct.
Okay, so a phase 1 award is different from a phase 1 clinical trial. In order to apply directly to a phase 2, that is a potential. However, you basically have to demonstrate that all of your, all of what you normally would have done for the phase 1 milestones have been met already. So a lot of people think that phase 1 versus 2 clinical trials line up perfectly with phase 1 versus phase 2 small business awards. Not necessarily, but if you talk with your program officer and they agree that you've met all those phase 1 milestones already, then, it might be a possibility to jump straight to the phase 2. But it does have to be an SBIR if you do the direct to phase 2.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. We have gotten a question about ULP and if they can provide some support to grant applicants. And what are the supports available? I don't know if that's a question that we can answer right now. Dr. Davis, is that one that you can answer?
Karen, if you would like to answer that one, I can direct that to you. So for that one, I would probably recommend directing you to Karen and Sam, who are contacts at University Lab Partners. So if you email the NIA Small Business email, I will direct you to them afterwards, and they can provide you with more information about the resources that ULP offers.
Thank you very much. Well, with that said, we would like to thank everyone who participated on the webinar today. We really appreciate all of your questions. We are here for you if you have more questions. We have chatted out our contact information. It's also on our website and fact sheet, which we've sent along. We will be sending you a notice with some of the links that we talked about today so that you can access them via email. We really appreciate your time. We hope you stay well, and please do reach out to us if you need anything. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you, Dr. Davis and ULP.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you to our colleagues at ULP for co-hosting this webinar with us, and thank you all for attending.
A photograph of 2 elderly men playing outdoor chess. Text, thank you. Please share your feedback at https://bit.ly/3byydqb.